5 points. While they drink vodka and orange juice in the trailer park on the cliffs above Lake Huron, Neil Bauer tells Brenda a story. It happened a long way away in Victoria, British Columbia, where Neil grew up. Neil is not much younger than Brenda, less than 3 years, but it sometimes feels to her like a generation gap, because she grew up here and stayed here, marrying Cornelius Zent when she was 20 years old, and Neil grew up on the West Coast where things were very different, and he left home at 16 to travel and work all over. What Brenda has seen of Victoria in pictures is flowers and horses. Flowers spilling out of baskets hanging from old-fashioned lamp-posts, filling grottos and decorating parks, horses carrying wagon loads of people to look at the sights. That's all just tourist shit, Neil says. About half the place is nothing but tourist shit. That's not where I'm talking about. He is talking about 5 points, which is, a section, or maybe just a corner of the city, where there was a school, a drugstore, and a Chinese grocery, and a candy store. When Neil was in public school, the candy store was run by a grouchy old woman with painted-on eyebrows. She used to let her cats sprawl in the sun in the window. After she died, some new people, Europeans, not Poles or Czechs, but from some smaller country. Croatia? Is that a country? They took over the candy store and changed it. They cleared out all the stale candy and the balloons that wouldn't blow up and the ballpoint pens that wouldn't write and the dead Mexican jumping beans. They painted the place top to bottom and put in a few chairs and tables. They still sold candy, in clear jars now instead of cat-pissed cardboard boxes, and rulers and erasers. But they also started to operate as a kind of neighborhood cafe with coffee and soft drinks and homemade cakes. The wife who made the cakes was very shy and fussy, and if you came up and tried to pay her, she would call for her husband in Croatian, or whatever. Let's say it was Croatian. In such a startled way, you'd think that you'd broken into her house and interrupted her private life. The husband spoke English pretty well. He was a little bald guy, polite and nervous, a chain smoker, and she was a big, thick woman with bent shoulders, always wearing an apron and a cardigan sweater. He washed the windows and swept off the sidewalk and took the money, and she baked the buns and cakes and made things that people had never seen before but that quickly became popular, like pierogi and poppy seed loaf. Their 2 daughters spoke English, just like Canadians, and went to the convent school. They showed up in their school uniforms in the late afternoon and got right to work. The younger one washed the coffee cups and glasses and wiped the tables. The older one did everything else. She waited on customers, worked the cash register, filled the trays, and shooed away the little kids who were hanging around not buying anything. When the younger one finished washing up, she would sit in the back room doing her homework, but the older one never sat down. If there was nothing to do at the moment, she just stood by the cash register watching. The younger one was called Lisa, the older one, Maria. Lisa was small and nice enough looking, just a little kid. But Maria, maybe by the age of 13, had big, saggy breasts and a rounded-out stomach and thick legs. She wore glasses, and her hair was done in braids around her head. She looked about 50 years old. And she acted it, the way she took over the store. Both parents seemed willing to take a back seat to her. The mother retreated to the back room, and the father became a handyman helper. Maria understood English and money and wasn't fazed by anything. All the little girls said, "Ugh, that Maria, isn't she gross?" But they were scared of her. She looked like she already knew all about running a business. Brenda and her husband also ran a business. They bought a farm just south of Logan and filled the barn with used appliances, which Cornelius knows how to fix, and second-hand furniture, and all the other things, the dishes, pictures, knives and forks and ornaments and jewelry that people like to poke through and think they're buying cheap. It's called Zent's Furniture Barn. Locally, a lot of people refer to it as the used furniture on the highway. They didn't always do this. Brenda used to teach nursery school, and Cornelius, who is 12 years older than she is, worked in the salt mine at Wally on the lake. After his accident, they had to think of something he could do sitting down most of the time, and they used the money they got to buy a worn-out farm with good buildings. Brenda quit her job because there was too much for Cornelius to handle by himself. There are hours in the day, and sometimes whole days when he has to lie down and watch television, or just lie on the living room floor, coping with the pain. In the evenings, Cornelius likes to drive over to Whalley. Brenda never offers. She waits for him to say, "Why don't you drive?" if he doesn't want the movement of his arms or legs to jar his back. The kids used to go along, but now that they're in high school, Lorna in grade 11 and Mark in grade 9, they usually don't want to. Brenda and Cornelius sit in the parked van and look at the seagulls lining up out on the breakwater, the grain elevators, the great green-lighted shafts and ramps of the mine where Cornelius used to work, the pyramids of coarse gray salt. Sometimes there is a long lake boat in port. Of course, there are pleasure boats in the summer, windsurfers out on the water, people fishing off the pier. The time of the sunset is posted daily on a board on the beach then. People come especially to watch it. Now, in October, the board is bare, and the lights are turned on along the pier. 1 or 2 diehards are still fishing, and the water is choppy and cold-looking, the harbor entirely businesslike. There is still work going on the beach. Since early last spring, boulders have been set up in some places. Sand has been poured down in others. A long, rocky spit has been constructed, all making a protected curve of beach with a rough road along it on which they drive. Never mind Cornelius's back. He wants to see. Trucks, earth movers, bulldozers have been busy all day, and they are still sitting there, temporarily tame and useless monsters, in the evening. This is where Neil works. He drives these things. He hauls the rocks around, clears the space, and makes the road for Brenda and Cornelius to drive on. He works for the Fordyce Construction Company from Logan, which has the contract. Cornelius looks at everything. He knows what the boats are loading, soft wheat, salt, corn, and where they're going. He understands how the harbor is being deepened, and he always wants to get a look at the huge pipe running at an angle onto the beach and crossing it, finally letting out water and sludge and rocks from the lake bottom which have never before seen the light of day. He goes and stands beside this pipe to listen to the commotion inside it, the banging and groaning of the rocks and water rushing on their way. He asks what a rough winter will do to all this changing and arranging, if the lake just picks up the rocks and beach and flings them aside and eats away at the clay cliffs as before. Brenda listens to Cornelius and thinks about Neil. She derives pleasure from being in the place where Neil spends his days. She likes to think of the noise and the steady strength of these machines, and of the men in cabs, bare-armed, easy with this power, as if they knew naturally what all this roaring and chomping up the shore is leading to. Their casual, good-humored authority. She loves the smell of work on their bodies, the language of it they speak, their absorption in it, their disregard of her. She loves to get a man fresh from all that. When she is down there with Cornelius and hasn't seen Neil for a while, she can feel uneasy and forlorn, as if this might be a world that could turn its back on her. Just after she has been with Neil, it's her kingdom. But what isn't then? The night before they are to meet, last night, for instance, she should be feeling happy and expectant, but to tell the truth, the last 24 hours, even the last 2 or 3 days, seem too full of pitfalls, too momentous for her to feel anything but caution and anxiety. It's a countdown. She actually counts the hours. She has a tendency to fill them with good deeds, cleaning jobs around the house, which she was putting off, mowing the lawn, doing a reorganization of the furniture barn, even weeding the rock garden. The morning of the day itself is when the hours pass most laggingly and are full of dangers. She always has a story about where she's supposed to be going that afternoon, but her expedition can't be an absolutely necessary one. That would be calling too much attention to it. So there's the chance always that something will come up to make Cornelius say, Can't you put that off till later in the week? Can't you do it some other day? It's not so much that she wouldn't then be able to get in touch with Neil, which bothers her. Neil would wait an hour or so, then figure out what had happened. It's that she thinks she couldn't bear it, to be so close, then have to do without. Yet she doesn't feel any physical craving during those last torturing hours. Even her secret preparations, her washing, shaving, oiling, and perfuming, don't arouse her. She stays numb, harassed by details, lies, arrangements, until the moment when she actually sees Neil's car. The fear that she won't be able to get away is succeeded during the 15-minute drive by the fear that he won't show up in that lonely, dead-end spot in the swamp which is their meeting place. What she's looking forward to during those last hours gets to be less of a physical thing, so that missing it would not be like missing a meal you're hungry for, but a ceremony on which your life or salvation depended. By the time Neil was an older teenager, but not old enough to get into bars, still hanging around at the 5 Points confectionery, the Croatians kept the old name for it, the change had arrived, which everybody who was alive then remembers. That's what Neil thinks, but Brenda says, I don't know, as far as I was concerned. All that was just sort of going on someplace else. Nobody knew what to do about it. Nobody was prepared. Some schools were strict about long hair on boys. Some thought it best to let that go and concentrate on serious things. Just hold it back with an elastic band was all they asked. And what about clothes? Chains and seed beads, rope sandals, Indian cotton, African patterns, everything all of a sudden soft and loose and bright. In Victoria, the change may not have been contained as so well as in some other places. It spilled over. Maybe the climate softened people up, not just young people. There was a big burst of paper flowers and marijuana fumes and music, the stuff that seemed so wild then, Neil says, and seems so tame now. And that music rolling out of downtown windows hung with dishonored flags over the flower beds in Beacon Hill Park to the yellow broom on the sea cliffs to the happy beaches looking over at the magic peaks of the Olympics. Everybody was in on the act. University professors wandered around with flowers behind their ears. People's mothers turned up in those outfits. Neil and his friends had contempt for these people, naturally, these hip oldsters, toe-dippers. Neil and his friends took the world of drugs and music seriously. When they wanted to do drugs, they went outside the confectionery. Sometimes they went as far as the cemetery and sat on the sea wall. Sometimes they sat beside the shed that was in back of the store. They couldn't go in. The shed was locked. Then they went back inside the confectionery and drank Cokes and ate hamburgers and cheeseburgers and cinnamon buns and cakes because they got very hungry. They leaned back on their chairs and watched the patterns move on the old pressed tin ceiling, which the Croatians had painted white. Flowers, towers, birds, monsters detached themselves, swam overhead. What were you taking? Brenda says. Pretty good stuff, says Neil, unless we got sold something rotten. Hash, acid, mescaline sometimes, combinations sometimes, nothing too serious. All I ever did was smoke about a third of a joint on the beach, says Brenda. When at first I wasn't even sure what it was, and when I got home my father slapped my face. That's not the truth. It was Cornelius. Cornelius slapped her face. It was before they were married, when Cornelius was working nights in the mine, and she would sit around on the beach after dark with some friends of her own age. Next day she told him, and he slapped her face. All they did in the confectionery was eat and moon around happily stoned and play stupid games, such as racing toy cars along the tabletops. Once a guy lay down on the floor and they squirted ketchup at him. Nobody cared. The daytime customers, the housewives buying bakery goods, and the pensioners filling time with a coffee never came in at night. The mother and Lisa had gone home on the bus to wherever they lived. Then even the father started going home a little after supper time. Maria was left in charge. She didn't care what they did, as long as they didn't do damage and as long as they paid. This was the world of drugs that belonged to the older boys, that they kept the younger boys out of. It was a while before they noticed that the younger ones had something too. They had some secret of their own. They were growing insolent and self-important. Some of them were always pestering the older boys to let them buy drugs. That was how it became evident that they had quite a bit of unexplained money. Neil has a younger brother named Jonathan, very straight now, married, a teacher. Jonathan began dropping hints. Other boys did the same thing. They couldn't keep the secret to themselves. Pretty soon it was all out in the open. They were getting their money from Maria. Maria was paying them to have sex with her. They did it in the back shed after she closed the store up at night. She had the key to the shed. She also had the day-to-day control of the money. She emptied the till at night. She kept the books. Her parents trusted her to do this. Why not? She was good at arithmetic. She was devoted to the business. She understood the whole operation better than they did. It seemed that they were very uncertain and superstitious about money, and they did not want to put it in the bank. They kept it in a safe or maybe just in a strong box somewhere and got it as they needed it. They must have felt they couldn't trust anybody, banks or anybody, outside of the family. What a godsend Maria must have seemed to them. Steady and smart, not pretty enough to be tempted to put her hopes or energies into anything but the business. A pillar, Maria. She was a head taller and 30 or 40 pounds heavier than those boys she paid. There are always a few bad moments after Brenda turns off the highway, where she has some excuse to be driving should anyone see her, and onto the side road. The van is noticeable, unmistakable. But once she has taken the plunge, driving where she shouldn't be, she feels stronger. When she turns onto the dead-end swamp road, there's no excuse possible. Spotted here, she's finished. She has about half a mile to drive out in the open before she gets to the trees. She'd hoped that they would plant corn, which would grow tall and shelter her, but they hadn't. They'd planted beans. At least the roadsides here hadn't been sprayed. The grass and weeds and berry bushes had grown tall, though not tall enough to hide a van. There was goldenrod and milkweed, with the pods burst open, and dangling bunches of bright, poisonous fruit, and wild grapevine flung over everything, even creeping onto the road. And finally, she was in. She was into the tunnel of trees. Cedar, hemlock, farther back in the wetter ground, the wispy-looking tamarack. Lots of soft maples with leaves spotty yellow and brown. No standing water, no black pools, even far back in the trees. They'd had luck with the dry summer and fall. She and Neil had had luck, not the farmers. If it had been a wet year, they could never have used this place. The hard ruts she eases the van through would have been slick mud, and the turnaround spot at the end a soggy sinkhole. That's about 1.5 miles in. There are some tricky spots to drive, a couple of bumpy little hills rising out of the swamp, and a narrow log bridge over a creek where she can't see any water, just choking yellowy cress and nettles sucking at dry mud. Neil drives an old blue Mercury, dark blue that can turn into a pool, a spot of swampy darkness under the trees. She strains to see it. She doesn't mind getting there a few minutes ahead of him to compose herself, brush out her hair, check her face, and spray her throat with purse cologne, sometimes between her legs as well. More than a few minutes makes her nervous. She isn't afraid of wild dogs or rapists or eyes watching her out of thickets. She used to pick berries in here when she was a child. That's how she knows about the place. She is afraid of what isn't there, not what is. The absence of Neil, the possibility of his defection, his sudden denial of her. That can turn any place, anything, ugly and menacing and stupid. Trees or gardens or parking meters or coffee tables, it wouldn't matter. Once he didn't come. He was sick. Food poisoning, or the most incredible hangover of his life. Something terrible, he told her on the phone that night. And she had to pretend it was somebody calling to sell them a sofa. She never forgot that wait, the draining of hope, the heat and the bugs. It was in July, and her body oozing sweat here on the seat of the van, like some sickly admission of defeat. He is here. He's there first. She can see one eye of the mercury in the deep cedar shade. It's like hitting water when you're dead of heat and scratched and bitten all over from picking berries in the summer bush. The lapping sweetness of it, the cool kindness soaking up all your troubles in its sudden depths. She gets the van parked and fluffs out her hair and jumps out, tries the door to show it's locked, else he'll send her running back just like Cornelius. Are you sure you locked the van? She walks across the little sunny space, the leaf-scattered ground, seeing herself walk, in her tight white pants and turquoise top and low-slung white belt and high heels, her bag over her shoulder. A shapely woman with fair, freckled skin and blue eyes rimmed with blue shadow and liner, screwed up appealingly against any light. Her reddish-blonde hair touched up yesterday, catching the sun like a crown of petals. She wears heels just for this walk, just for this moment of crossing the road with his eyes on her, the extra bit of pelvic movement and leg length they give her. Often they've made love in his car, right here at their meeting place, though they always keep telling each other to wait. Stop, wait till we get to the trailer. Wait means the opposite of what it says after a while. Once they started as they drove. Brenda slipped off her pants and pulled up her loose summer skirt, not saying a word, looking straight ahead, and they ended up stopping beside the highway, taking a shocking risk. Now, when they pass this spot, she always says something like, "Don't go off the road here," or "Somebody should put up a warning sign." Historical marker, Neil says. They have a history of passion, the way families have a history, or people who have gone to school together. They don't have much else. They've never eaten a meal with each other or seen a movie. But they've come through some complicated adventures together and dangers, not just of the stopping on the highway kind. They've taken risks, surprising each other, always correctly. In dreams, you can have the feeling that you've had this dream before, that you have this dream over and over again, and you know that it's really nothing that simple. You know that there's a whole underground system that you call dreams, having nothing better to call them. And this system is not like roads or tunnels, but more like a live body network, all coiling and stretching, unpredictable but finally familiar. Where you are now, where you've always been. That was the way it was with them and sex, going somewhere like that. And they understood the same things about it and trusted each other so far. Another time on the highway, Brenda saw a white convertible approaching, an old white Mustang convertible with the top down. This was in the summer, and she slid to the floor. "Who's in that car?" she said. "Look, quick." "Girls," Neil said. 4 or 5 girls. "Out looking for guys." "My daughter," Brenda said, scrambling up again. "Good thing I wasn't wearing my seatbelt." "You got a daughter old enough to drive?" said Neil. "You got a daughter owns a convertible? Her friend owns it. Lorna doesn't drive yet. She could. She's 16. She felt there were things in the air then that he could have said, that she hoped he wouldn't. The things men feel obliged to say about young girls. "You could have one that age yourself," she said. "Maybe you do and don't know it. Also, she lied to me. She said she was going to play tennis." Again, he didn't say anything she hoped not to hear. Any sly reminder about lies, a danger past. All he said was, "Easy, take it easy, nothing happened." She had no way of knowing how much he understood of her feelings at that moment, or if he understood anything. They almost never mentioned that part of her life. They never mentioned Cornelius, though he was the one Neil talked to the first time he came to the furniture barn. He came to look for a bicycle, just a cheap bike to ride on the country roads. They had no bikes around at that time, but he stayed and talked to Cornelius for a while about the kind he wanted, ways of repairing or improving that kind, how they should watch out for one. He said he would drop by again. He did that very soon, and only Brenda was there. Cornelius had gone to the house to lie down. It was one of his bad days. Neil and Brenda made everything clear to each other then without saying anything definite. When he phoned and asked her to have a drink with him in a tavern on the Lakeshore Road, she knew what he was asking, and she knew what she would answer. She told him she hadn't done anything like this before. This was a lie, in one way, and in another way true. During store hours, Maria didn't let one sort of transaction interfere with another. Everybody paid as usual. She didn't behave any differently. She was still in charge. The boys knew that they had some bargaining power, but they were never sure how much. $1? $2? $5? It wasn't as if she had to depend on one or two of them. There were always several friends outside, waiting and willing when she took one of them into the shed before she caught the bus home. She warned them that she would stop dealing with them if they talked, and for a while they believed her. She didn't hire them regularly at first, or all that often. That was at first. Over a few months' time, things began to change. Maria's needs increased. The bargaining got to be more open and obstreperous. The news got out. Maria's powers were being chipped and then hammered away. Come on, Maria, give me a 10. Me too. Maria, give me a 10, too. Come on, Maria, you know me. 20, Maria, give me 20. Come on. $20, you owe me, Maria. Come on now, you don't want me to tell. Come on, Maria. A 20, 20, 20. Maria is forking over. She's going to the shed every night. And if that isn't bad enough for her, some boys start refusing. They want the money first. They take the money and then they say no. They say she never paid them. She paid them. She paid them in front of witnesses, and all the witnesses deny that she did. They shake their heads. They taunt her. No, you never paid him. I never saw you. You pay me now and I'll go. I promise I will. I'll go. You pay me 20, Maria. And the older boys who have learned from their younger brothers what is going on are coming up to her at the cash register and saying, how about me, Maria? You know me too? Come on, Maria, how about a 20? Those boys never go to the shed with her, never. Did she think they would? They never even promise. They just ask her for the money. You know me a long time, Maria. They threaten, they wheedle. Aren't I your friend too, Maria? Nobody was Maria's friend. Maria's skin broke out in a rash of pimples. She must have raked them with her fingernails. They bled. The skin all around them was swollen and flushed and sometimes blood-stained. Maria's matronly, watchful calm was gone. She looked wild and sullen and mean. She gave them looks full of hate, but she continued giving them money. She kept handing over the bills, not even trying to bargain or to argue or refuse any more. In a rage she did it, a silent rage. The more they taunted her, the more readily the $20 bills flew out of the till. Very little, perhaps nothing, was done to earn them now. They're stoned all the time, Neil and his friends. All the time now they have this money. They see sweet streams of atoms flowing in the Formica tabletops. Their colored souls are shooting out under their fingernails. Maria has gone crazy. The store is bleeding money. How can this go on? How is it going to end? Maria must be into the strong box now. The till at the end of the day wouldn't have enough for her. And all the time her mother keeps on baking buns and making pierogi, and the father keeps sweeping the sidewalk and greeting the customers. Nobody has told them. They go on just the same. They had to find out on their own. They found a bill that Maria hadn't paid, something like that. Somebody coming in with an unpaid bill, and they went to get the money to pay it, and they found that there was no money. The money wasn't where they kept it, in the safe or strong box or wherever, and it wasn't anywhere else. The money was gone. That was how they found out. Maria had succeeded in giving away everything. All they had saved, all their slowly accumulated profits, all the money on which they operated their business. Truly, everything. They could not pay the rent now. They could not pay the electricity bill or their suppliers. They could not keep on running the confectionery. At least they believed they couldn't. Maybe they simply had not the heart to go on. The store was locked. A sign went up on the door, closed until further notice. Nearly a year went by before the place was reopened. It had been turned into a laundromat. It was supposed to be Maria's mother, that big, meek, bent-over woman who insisted on bringing charges against her daughter. She was scared of the English language and the cash register, but she brought Maria to court. Of course, Maria could only be charged as a juvenile, and she could only be sent to a place for young offenders, and nothing could be done about the boys at all. They all lied anyway. They said it wasn't them. Maria's parents must have found jobs. They must have gone on living in Victoria because her sister Lisa did. She still swam at the Y, and in a few years she was working at Eaton's in cosmetics. She was very glamorous and haughty by that time. Neil always has vodka and orange juice for them to drink. That's Brenda's choice. She read somewhere that orange juice replenishes the vitamin C that the liquor leaches away, and she hopes the vodka really can't be detected on your breath. Neil tidies up the trailer, too, or so she thinks, because of the paper bag full of beer cans leaning against the cupboard, a pile of newspapers pushed together, not really folded, a pair of socks kicked half under the daybed. Maybe his housemate does it. A man called Gary, whom Brenda has never met or seen a picture of and would not know if they met on the street. Would he know her? He knows she comes here. He knows when. Does he even know her name? Does he recognize her perfume, the smell of her sex, when he comes home in the evening? She likes the trailer. The way nothing in it has been made to look balanced or permanent. Things set down just wherever they will be convenient. No curtains or placemats, not even a pair of salt and pepper shakers, just the salt box and the pepper tin, the way they come from the store. She loves the sight of Neil's bed, badly made, with a rough plaid blanket and a flat pillow. Not a marriage bed or a bed of illness, comfort, complication. The bed of his lust and sleep, equally strenuous and oblivious. She loves the life of his body, so sure of its rights. She wants commands from him, never requests. She wants to be his territory. It's only in the bathroom that the dirt bothers her a bit, like anybody else's dirt, and she wishes they'd done a better job of cleaning the toilet and the wash basin. They sit at the table to drink, looking out through the trailer window at the steely, glittering, choppy water of the lake. Here the trees, exposed to lake winds, are almost bare. Birch bones and poplars, stiff and bright as straw, frame the water. There may be snow in another month, certainly in 2 months. The seaway will close. The lake boats will be tied up for the winter. There'll be a wild landscape of ice thrown up between the shore and the open water. Neil says he doesn't know what he'll do once the work on the beach is over. Maybe stay on, try to get another job. Maybe go on unemployment insurance for a while, get a snowmobile, enjoy the winter. Or he could go and look for work somewhere else, visit friends. He has friends all over the continent of North America and out of it. He has friends in Peru. So what happened? Brenda says. Don't you have any idea what happened to Maria? Neil says no, he has no idea. The story won't leave Brenda alone. It stays with her like a coating on the tongue or taste in the mouth. Well, maybe she got married, she says. After she got out? Lots of people get married who are no beauties, that's for sure. She might have lost weight and be looking good, even. Sure, says Neil. Maybe have guys paying her instead of the other way around. Or she might still be just sitting in one of those places, says Brenda. One of those places where they put people. Now she feels a pain between her legs. Not unusual after one of these sessions. If she was to stand up at this moment, she'd feel a throb there. She'd feel the blood flowing back down through all the little veins and arteries that have been squashed and bruised. She'd feel herself throbbing like a big swollen blister. And the semen leaking out. Sometimes it takes a long while. What is it doing up there? Are there some mysterious traps? She takes a long drink and says, So how much money did you get out of her? I never got anything, Neil says. I just knew those other guys who did. It was my brother Jonathan made the money off her. I wonder what he'd say if I reminded him now. Older guys, too, says Brenda. You said older guys, too. Don't tell me you just sat back and watched and never got your share. That's what I am telling you. I never got anything. Brenda clicks her tongue, tut-tut, and empties her glass and moves it around on the table, looking skeptically at the wet circles. Want another, Neil says. He takes the glass out of her hand. I've got to go, she says. Soon. You can make love in a hurry if you have to, but you need time for a fight. Is that what they're starting on? A fight? She feels edgy but happy. Her happiness is tight and private, not the sort that flows out from you and fuzzes everything and makes you good-naturedly careless about what you say. The very opposite. She feels light and sharp and unconnected. When Neil brings her back a full glass, she takes a drink from it at once to safeguard this feeling. "You've got the same name as my husband," she says. "It's funny I never thought of that before." She has thought of it before. She just hasn't mentioned it, knowing it's not something Neil would like to hear. "Cornelius isn't the same as Neil," he says. "It's Dutch," says Brenda. "Some Dutch people shorten it to Neil." "Yeah, but I'm not Dutch, and I wasn't named Cornelius. Just Neil." "Still, if his had been shortened, you'd be named the same." "His isn't shortened." "I never said it was. I said if it had been." "So why say that if it isn't?" He must feel the same thing she does, the slow but irresistible rise of a new excitement, the need to say and hear dire things. What a sharp, releasing pleasure there is in the first blow, and what a dazzling temptation ahead. Destruction. You don't stop to think why you want that destruction. You just do. "Why do we have to drink every time?" Neil says abruptly. "Do we want to turn ourselves into alcoholics or something?" Brenda takes a quick sip and pushes her glass away. "Who has to drink?" she says. She thinks he means they should drink coffee or cokes. But he gets up and goes to the dresser where he keeps his clothes, opens a drawer and says, "Come over here." "I don't want to look at any of that stuff," she says. "You don't even know what it is," says Neil. "Sure I do." Of course she doesn't. Not specifically. "You think it's going to bite you?" he says. Brenda drinks again and keeps looking out the window. The sun is getting down in the sky already, pushing the bright light across the table to warm her hands. "You don't approve," Neil says. "I don't approve or disapprove," she says, aware of having lost some control, of not being as happy as she was. "I don't care what you do. That's you." "I don't approve or disapprove," says Neil in a mincing voice. "I don't care what you do." That's the signal, which one or the other has to give. A flash of hate, pure meanness like the glint of a blade. The signal that the fight can come out into the open. Brenda takes a deep drink as if she very much deserved it. She feels a desolate satisfaction. She stands up and says, "Time for me to go." "What if I'm not ready to go yet?" Neil says. "I said me, not you." "Oh, you got a car outside?" he says. "I can walk." Neil says, "That's 5 miles back to where the van is." "People have walked 5 miles." "In shoes like that?" says Neil. They both look at her yellow shoes, which match the appliqued satin birds on her sweater. Both things bought and worn for him. "You didn't wear those shoes for walking," he says. "You wore them so every step you took would show off your fat arse." She walks along the lakeshore road in the gravel, which bruises her feet through the shoes and makes her pay attention to each step, lest she twist an ankle. The afternoon is now too cold for just a sweater. The wind off the lake blows at her sideways, and every time a vehicle passes, particularly a truck, an eddy of stiff wind whirls around her and grit blows into her face. Some of the trucks slow down, of course, and some cars do too, and men yell at her out of the windows. One car skids onto the gravel and stops ahead of her. She stands still. She cannot think what else to do. And after a moment, he churns back onto the pavement and she starts walking again. That's all right. She's not in any real danger. She doesn't even worry about being seen by someone she knows. She feels too free to care. She thinks about the first time Neil came to the furniture barn, how he put his arm around Sampson's neck and said, "Not much of a watchdog you got there, ma'am." She thought the ma'am was impudent, phony, out of some old Elvis Presley movie. And what he said next was worse. She looked at Sampson and she said, "He's better at night." And Neil said, "So am I." Impudent, swaggering, conceited, she thought. And he's not young enough to get away with it. Her opinion didn't even change so much the second time. What happened was that all that became just something to get past. It was something she could let him know he didn't have to do. It was her job to take his gifts seriously so that he could be serious too, and easy and grateful. How was she sure so soon that what she didn't like about him wasn't real? When she's in the second mile, or maybe just the second half of the first mile, the Mercury catches up to her. It pulls onto the gravel across the road. She goes over and gets in. She doesn't see why not. It doesn't mean that she's going to talk to him or be with him any longer than the few minutes it will take to drive to the swamp road and the van. His presence doesn't need to weigh on her any more than the grit blowing across the road. She winds the window all the way down so that there will be a rush of chilly wind across anything he may have to say. "I want to beg your pardon for the personal remarks," he says. "Why?" she says. "It's true. It is fat." "No, it is," she says, in a tone of bored finality that is quite sincere. It shuts him up for a few miles until they've turned down the swamp road and are driving in under the trees. "If you thought there was a needle there in the drawer, there wasn't," says Neil. "It isn't any of my business what there was," she says. "All that was in there was some perks and quaaludes and a little hash." She remembers a fight she had with Cornelius, one that almost broke their engagement. It wasn't the time he slapped her for smoking marijuana. They made that up quickly. It wasn't about anything to do with their own lives. They were talking about a man Cornelius worked with at the mine, and his wife, and their retarded child. This child was just a vegetable, Cornelius said. All it did was gibber away in a sort of pen in the corner of the living room and mess its pants. It was about 6 or 7 years old, and that was all it would ever do. Cornelius said he believed that if anybody had a child like that, they had a right to get rid of it. He said that was what he would do. No question about it. There were a lot of ways you could do it and never get caught, and he bet that was what a lot of people did. He and Brenda had a terrible fight about this. But all the time they were arguing and fighting, Brenda suspected that this was not something Cornelius would really do. It was something he had to say he would do. To her. To her, he had to insist that he would do it. And this actually made her angrier at him than she would have been if she believed he was entirely and brutally sincere. He wanted her to argue with him about this. He wanted her protest, her horror. And why was that? Men wanted you to make a fuss about disposing of vegetable babies or taking drugs or driving a car like a bat out of hell. And why was that? So they could have your marshmallow sissy goodness to preen against with their hard show-off badness. So that they finally could give in to you growling and not have to be so bad and reckless anymore. Whatever it was, you got sick of it. In the mine accident, Cornelius could have been crushed to death. He was working the night shift when it happened. In the great walls of rock salt, an undercut is made. Then there are holes drilled for explosives. The charges are fitted in. An explosion goes off every night at 5 minutes to midnight. The huge slice of salt slides loose to be started on its journey to the surface. Cornelius was lifted up in a cage on the end of the arm of the scaler. He was to break off the loose material on the roof and fix it in the bolts that held it for the explosion. Something went wrong with the hydraulic controls he was operating. He stalled, tried for a little power, and got a surge that lifted him so that he saw the rock ceiling closing down on him like a lid. He ducked. The cage halted. A rocky outcrop struck him in the back. He had worked in the mine for 7 years before that and hardly ever spoke to Brenda about what it was like. Now he tells her. It's a world of its own, he says. Caverns and pillars miles out under the lake. If you get in a passage where there are no machines to light the gray walls, the salt dusty air, and you turn your headlamp off, you can find out what real darkness is like, the darkness people on the surface of the earth never get to see. The machines stay down there forever. Some are assembled down there, taken down in parts. All are repaired there, and finally, they're ransacked for usable parts, then piled into a dead-end passage that is sealed up. It's a tomb for these underground machines. They make a ferocious noise all the time they're working. The noise of the machines and the ventilating fans cuts out any human voice. They've just got a new machine that can do what Cornelius went up in the cage to do. It can do it by itself, without a man. Brenda doesn't know if he misses being down there. He says he doesn't. He says he just can't look at the surface of the water without seeing all that underneath, which nobody who hasn't seen it could imagine. Neil and Brenda drive along under the trees where suddenly you can hardly feel the wind at all. Also, I did take some money, Neil says. I got $40, which compared to what some guys got was just nothing. I swear that's all, $40. I never got any more. She doesn't say anything. I wasn't looking to confess it, he says. I just wanted to talk about it. Then what pisses me off is I lied anyway. Now that she can hear his voice better, she notices that it's nearly as flat and tired as her own. She sees his hands on the wheel and thinks what a hard time she would have describing what he looks like. At a distance, in the car, waiting for her, he's always been a bright blur, his presence a relief and a promise. Close up, he's been certain separate areas, silky or toughened skin, fuzz, wiry hair or shaved prickles, smells that are unique or shared with other men. But it's chiefly an energy, a quality of his self, that she can see in his blunt, short fingers or the tan curve of his forehead. And even to call it energy is not exact. It's more like the sap of him rising from the roots, clear and on the move, filling him to bursting. That's what she has set herself to follow, the sap, the current under the skin, as if that were the one true thing. If she turned sideways now, she could see him for what he is, that tanned, curved forehead, the receding fringe of curly brown hair, heavy eyebrows with a few gray hairs in them, deep-set, light-colored eyes, and a mouth that enjoys itself, rather sulky and proud. A boyish man, beginning to age, though he still feels light and wild on top of her, after Cornelius's bulk settling down possessively, like a ton of blankets. He turns the car around. He points it ready to drive back, and it's time for her to get out and go across to the van. He takes his hands off the wheel with the engine running, flexes his fingers, then grabs the rim hard again, hard enough you'd think to squeeze it to pulp. "Christ, don't get out yet," he says. "Don't get out of the car." She hasn't even put a hand on the door. She hasn't made a move to leave. Doesn't he know what's happening? Maybe you need the experience of a lot of married fights to know it. To know that what you think and for a while hope is the absolute end for you can turn out to be only the start of a new stage, a continuation. That's what's happening. That's what has happened. He has lost some of his sheen for her. He may not get it back. Probably the same goes for her with him. She feels his heaviness and anger and surprise. She feels that also in herself. She thinks that up to now was easy.